Pedro Pascal is losing his mind, alright? We all know that, yes, the Fantastic Four, it does need a specific target margin to actually become a success at the box office. That is the ultimate truth, right?
Just like we see with every single Marvel movie released, the big lead up, the excitement, the hype that the mainstream media desperately tries to generate. Then the early access screenings come out and they tell you it's the best thing ever. Then the reviews come out. Then the opening weekend happens. And even when the opening weekend is weak, like it was with Fantastic Four First Steps, they tell you, oh my gosh, everybody, Marvel's back, watch out. And it always ends up happening this way, where the second weekend falls off a cliff, and that is what we saw for Fantastic Four. But would it rebound in its third weekend? Well, of course it didn't.
It was supposed to be Marvel's big comeback, the film that reignited excitement for the next phase of the MCU. Instead, Fantastic Four has quickly earned a very different label, a box office disaster. The numbers aren't just lower than expected. They've sent shockwaves through Disney and Marvel Studios, leaving executives scrambling for answers. But here's the twist. This isn't just about ticket sales. Behind the scenes, fan backlash, controversial casting choices, but deep down, fans speaking a very positive story, and even political arguments from the film's own lead actor have turned what should have been a triumphant reboot into one of the most divisive moments in Marvel history.
With Pedro Pascal making some of the worst decisions during the press tour for Fantastic Four, one major development going on now involves how he yet again attacked fans and said some of the most offensive things yet toward Marvel fans.
And now it's looking like Fantastic Four is gonna bomb. I think Pedro Pascal fatigue is real. And people are tired of this guy. He's in everything. He's constantly in all these magazines and websites are trying to say this is the sexiest man alive.
And if you thought this story ended with opening weekend, think again, because what happened around Fantastic Four may reveal a much bigger problem that Marvel can't afford to ignore. When Marvel announced that Fantastic Four was finally joining the MCU, expectations were sky high. This wasn't just another superhero flick. It was supposed to be the foundation for the next big Marvel era. Fans imagined a film that would set the stage for Spider-Man Brand New Day and the highly anticipated Avengers Doomsday. Executives at Disney expected a billion-dollar performance.
So here's the piece from Deadline magazine. Fantastic Four First Steps, $40 million second frame. Just to remind you, it wasn't even a week ago that Deadline magazine was projecting a $48 million second weekend, a 60% drop from the first weekend. And then over the next few days after that, it became a 45 to 47 million.
Doing fantastic at the box office. Its opening weekend was good enough. It well outperformed Thunderbolts and Captain America Brave New World from earlier this year, but its second weekend saw a 66% drop off, which is a bad number.
Confident that these iconic characters would carry the franchise into the future. But reality hit hard on opening weekend. The numbers rolling in were nowhere near what Marvel had projected. Instead of breaking records, the film stumbled out of the gate, sparking headlines that labeled it a box office disaster. Even international markets, which usually save underperforming Marvel films, showed lukewarm results. For a studio that built its empire on guaranteed blockbusters, this was more than disappointing. It was alarming. Behind the smiles and press releases, Disney and Marvel went into full-blown damage control mode.
Bob Iger is now having issues with Pedro Pascal. Just days ago, they already punished Pascal by reducing his press tour appearances and urging him to stop and cut it out with his politics. However, now Bob Iger took action against Pedro in the most unexpected way possible, where he canceled an entire featurette for Fantastic Four that was filmed, focusing strictly on Pedro as Reed Richards.
Scrambling to explain why their so-called crown jewel was failing to shine. And yet, ticket sales were only part of the problem, because while the movie's performance rattled executives, it was the reaction from fans that revealed something even more dangerous for Marvel's future. For years, Marvel could do no wrong. Every release felt like an event, each film connecting to the larger universe that fans couldn't get enough of. But by the time Fantastic Four arrived, something had changed. Audiences weren't rushing to theaters out of excitement. They were showing up out of habit. And even that habit was starting to fade. After more than a decade of non-stop releases, the so-called Marvel magic felt worn out.
Now, given that the Fantastic Four First Steps box office situation is throwing both Disney and Marvel Studios into a state of panic for obvious reasons, we know that those out there like Pedro Pascal, who continues to make things political during the press tour of this film, it's not helping at all in any case. And one thing is for certain right now is that the numbers that they're pulling in right now for the box office metrics, these aren't the numbers that they were hoping for, especially before Spider-Man Brand New Day and Avengers Doomsday in, of course, 2026.
Fans called it superhero burnout, while others labeled it Disney fatigue. The formula that once guaranteed success now felt predictable, and many viewers began asking if Marvel was prioritizing quantity over quality. Fantastic Four didn't help matters. For longtime comic fans, these characters deserved a film that redefined what Marvel could be. Instead, most walked away calling it just okay. Not terrible, not groundbreaking, just a forgettable popcorn flick. And in today's crowded entertainment world, forgettable is the last thing Marvel can afford to be. Even die-hard fans admitted this was the first Marvel movie they didn't feel the urge to rewatch. That sense of disappointment spread quickly online, fueling the narrative that Marvel had lost touch with its own audience.
Go on leading into the actual thing that they are trying to project. It means that trend line is probably going to continue. If it's fallen that much, from 48 million on Monday to 40 million today, chances are that the actual weekend numbers domestically for Fantastic Four are going to come in under $40 million.
But fatigue wasn't the only issue. What really turned frustration into a firestorm was one decision that sparked heated debate before the movie even hit theaters: the casting. When Marvel announced Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards, better known as Mr. Fantastic, the internet immediately lit up. On paper, it seemed like a bold move. Pascal was riding high from major roles in The Last of Us and The Mandalorian. But for Marvel fans, Reed Richards wasn't just another superhero. He's one of the most iconic minds in the Marvel Universe, a role many believed required a very specific type of presence. Almost instantly, criticism spread that Pascal was a miscast, that he didn't fit the tone or intellect of Reed Richards. Still, Marvel doubled down, insisting the choice would pay off once audiences saw the performance. But the problem didn't stop with the casting itself. During the press tour, Pascal repeatedly waded into political debates when asked about the movie, turning interviews into battlegrounds that had little to do with the film. Instead of cooling fan skepticism, his comments fueled it, especially when he dismissed critics of his casting as being driven by political agendas rather than genuine concerns. Suddenly, discussions about Fantastic Four weren't centered on the story, the special effects, or the future of the MCU. They were centered on Pedro Pascal himself. And for Marvel, that was a nightmare, because just when they needed fans united behind their reboot, the lead actor had become the lightning rod for division. If the casting of Reed Richards raised eyebrows, Marvel's decision to reinvent the Silver Surfer poured gasoline on the fire. Instead of bringing back the classic Norrin Rad, the studio introduced Shala Bal, a female version of the character. For Marvel, it was framed as a bold step forward, a fresh interpretation meant to separate this reboot from the 2007 Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. But for many longtime fans, this wasn't a reinvention. It was a rewrite of one of Marvel's most beloved cosmic figures. Online forums exploded with debates. Some praised the move as progressive and exciting, while others accused Marvel of sidelining the original Silver Surfer purely to push an agenda. And right in the middle of it all was Pedro Pascal, passionately defending the change and arguing that Shia LaBeouf represented the future of the character. Instead of calming the backlash, his comments only sharpened the divide. What could have been a bold, creative twist quickly turned into yet another controversy, dragging down the film's reputation. By the time the movie premiered, fans weren't just questioning the story. They were questioning Marvel's priorities. Were they focused on telling timeless superhero tales, or were they more concerned with sparking headlines? That debate didn't just stay online. It followed the film into theaters, and the numbers proved it. By the time Fantastic Four hit theaters, the conversation surrounding the movie had shifted almost entirely away from the film itself. Instead, it became about Pedro Pascal's outspoken political commentary. During interviews, he doubled down on blaming fan backlash, not on casting decisions or storytelling missteps, but on sexism, misogyny, and even ties to political groups. For some, his words felt like an attack on genuine fans who simply didn't connect with the creative choices. Critics argued that he was flipping the narrative, turning what should have been a discussion about the quality of the movie into a political fight. What made matters worse was Pascal's own contradictions. At one point, he claimed Fantastic Four was one of Marvel's most successful films in history, only to later admit that the box office numbers weren't where they should be because of supposed political opposition. To many, it looked less like honesty and more like damage control wrapped in activism. Fans who wanted to talk about the film's writing, tone, or pacing suddenly found themselves painted as part of a political divide. And instead of celebrating Marvel's long-awaited reboot, the spotlight was on a feud between actor and audience. That tension created the sense that Marvel was no longer listening to fans. And for a franchise built on fan loyalty, that's a dangerous place to be. Inside Marvel Studios, the fallout from Fantastic Four was impossible to ignore. What was supposed to be a triumphant launch quickly became a public relations headache, and reports suggest executives like Bob Iger and Kevin Feige were forced into non-stop damage control. Instead of promoting the movie's strengths, the studio found itself answering questions about Pedro Pascal's political remarks, fan boycotts, and the growing divide within the Marvel community. Behind the scenes, insiders hinted at heated discussions over whether actors should keep politics out of press tours altogether. Yet publicly, Disney stood by Pascal, choosing not to rein him in. That decision only amplified fan frustration, giving the impression that Marvel cared more about defending its stars than addressing its audience's concerns. Meanwhile, critics pointed out the larger issue. Marvel's constant stream of movies and shows had watered down the brand. Rather than spacing out releases and building excitement, Disney seemed locked in a cycle of content overload. To fans, the solution was obvious. Slow down, focus on quality, and reconnect with the audience that built the MCU in the first place. But from the outside looking in, Marvel appeared unwilling to change course. And that raised a bigger question. If Fantastic Four was already being called a disaster, what did that mean for the studio's next massive gamble, Avengers Doomsday? With the dust settling around Fantastic Four, the spotlight has already shifted to Marvel's next big gamble, Avengers Doomsday. Pedro Pascal, despite the backlash, has a major role in the film, and fans are split on whether his presence will help or hurt the project. For Marvel, this movie isn't just another installment. It's the backbone of their entire upcoming slate. If it stumbles, the ripple effect could damage years of planning. Some insiders suggest Marvel is already considering scaling back, possibly reducing the number of releases per year to rebuild hype and restore faith in the brand. Others argue it may be too late, that the trust between Marvel and its fan base has already cracked. Online, speculation is rampant. Will audiences still show up for the next Avengers crossover, or has superhero fatigue reached the point of no return? The uncertainty surrounding Marvel's future is unlike anything the studio has faced before. For a company that once set the gold standard for blockbuster storytelling, the stakes have never been higher. And if Fantastic Four was the warning sign, then Avengers Doomsday will be the true test of whether Marvel can still deliver an experience fans believe in. In the end, the story of Fantastic Four isn't just about one film underperforming. It's about a studio at a crossroads. For years, Marvel could rely on spectacle and legacy to guarantee success. But this time, fatigue, controversial choices, and political distractions exposed a much deeper problem: the growing disconnect between Marvel and its fans. Instead of uniting audiences around beloved characters, the reboot became a lightning rod for division. And while Disney and Marvel scramble to defend their choices, the bigger question remains: can they rebuild the trust that once made every Marvel release an event? With Avengers Doomsday looming, the stakes couldn't be higher. Because if Fantastic Four was a stumble, the next misstep could shake the foundation of the MCU itself.